So, avoidant men and the fear of sharing how he feels because of the response, because of the reaction, right? If you're avoidant man, you've had this feeling often that you're like, I want to say something, I want to speak up, but I'm scared to because of how my partner's reacted, how my past partners reacted. And it's going to be too much. I'll just say nothing. And if maybe you're an anxious partner, you listen to this and you're like, why won't my partner say what's going on? I don't know what's going on. Why does he always assume that I'm going to be overreacting? Let me tell you, I'm going to get into this, right? So I'm going to get into the details of this because it's really important. Something that I dealt with for years, decades, where I didn't share how I felt. You know, it's probably the one thing I have to consciously still do. You know, it's not anywhere near as bad as before, but I can still fall into that, like, oh, I'm not going to say anything because this is going to be too hard, right? It's going to be overwhelming if I speak up. I'm not going to be able to deal with the emotional reaction that's going to come back, right? What this really starts being grounded in is the past, right? A lot of men have been punished, mocked, and misunderstood when they've spoken up, right? When they speak up. They've done it in groups of men. It's been by other women. Like women, you have to, if you're listening to a woman and you're like, oh, I would never do that to a man. I'm telling you, it's happened to me a lot of times and it's happened to a lot of men before, but they've spoken up about how they feel or what they want or what they're thinking and their partner flies off the fucking handle, right? And sometimes the man has created this by some of his past actions, but sometimes it's just that he says the thing like, oh, I'm unsure about the relationship. And they start screaming and shouting and being like, this is all your fault and blah, blah, blah. And that will condition a man to be like, well, if I'm going to speak, then, you know, I don't want to get shouted at just for saying how I feel. So I'm going to say anything, right? Because a man learns that his, you know, emotions are unpredictable. So the reaction is unpredictable and the fear is just overwhelming. And the reaction to him really is just danger. Like a reaction is danger. That's the thing that's going on. So I'm going to get into why this happens, why it keeps happening, and what to do about it, right? And this is speaking to avoidant men. You know, I'm trying to support you. And there's some bits and pieces I'll throw in for the anxious women who are probably making up most of the listenership here. I joke, you're not making up most of the listenership. I know avoidant men, you're listening to it because you call me and you come to me for coaching. So I know you're doing the work, right? You just do it very quietly in secret so that no one's reacting or judging you. So what's there's the history, the historical conditioning, right? We grow up with emotional inconsistent caregivers. Sometimes they give us love. Sometimes they're inconsistent. Sometimes they only care about us. And when I say us, I mean avoidant men because of our ability to do things, right? We're told to man up. Every man's been told to man up or stop crying or don't be dramatic. Or they've seen someone say to another man, don't be dramatic. Stop being so emotional. Stop being so needy, right? That's what happens. And then we learn. Mentally, nervous system learns emotional expression will be rejected, will cause chaos, or will cause engulfment from other people's feelings. Overwhelm, right? Or rejection, loneliness. Loneliness links to being cast aside. So we just want to avoid that. So what we develop is this kind of anticipatory shame, right? The avoidant man, he doesn't just fear his partner's response. He fears his response to his partner's response. He fears his own emotional feelings that he's having and then the feelings he's going to have if the negative response happens as well, right? You know, he's thinking, am I going to look weak? Is she going to think less of me? Is she going to desire me less? Yeah. What happens if I ruin everything? That's something so many men say to me. If I open up and I say this thing, what happens if I ruin everything, right? These are the things that are going through his mind, right? And he might go, this is disproportionate, but this is what happens with our attachment, right? It doesn't play in the realm of logic and sense, just like most emotions to some degree, right? So you have to have that level of kind of compassion for yourself, like, oh yeah, this is a completely illogical response, but it's also valid, right? To what's happening. We all have these, right? So if you're thinking like, oh, this doesn't make sense, these people are so weird. No, you have your own illogical things that are going on. If you're an anxious person, you know, the way that you struggle with space and the way that you struggle with people who are inconsistent to some degree or, you know, blah, blah, blah. The list can go on because I work with anxious guys as well. So the next one is this misattuned piece, right? Men have this fear of being misunderstood. Avoidant men, you know, they're worried about the response, right? They're misattuned. So they end up in this kind of pattern loop, which is they feel something, right? We feel something. An avoidant man feels something. He considers sharing it, right? He thinks a lot about the sharing, like, oh, should I say this? Should I not say this? How should I say this? Then he imagines very quickly the reaction from his partner. But generally, he just imagines the worst case scenarios. Oh, she's going to think I'm stupid. Oh, she's going to overreact. Oh my God, she's not going to understand. I have to explain more. And all he starts to do is project into the future, right? The reality he doesn't experience, and pulls all the emotions of that and dumps that on him now. So imagine I thought of the worst case scenario of me telling Orsa that I want to go on holiday with some friends. This is a real example. Then I think of the 15 different ways she's going to respond negatively. So what I'm basically doing is clumping all that negative emotion, that fear, the worry, the anxiety, the stress, and feeling all of it now, right? And then this leads to me shutting down. Then that leads to a bit of resentment because I'm like, my brain almost thinks that she's responding in this way, right? And then distance gets created, right? It's this really vicious loop. How does this show up in dating and relationships, right? It shows up in dating relationships where we want to say something and we don't. We feel frustration and we want to speak our mind, but we don't. It looks like you shutting down when you're asked a question. It looks like you not sharing how you really feel. You're not sharing what you want, which leads to your partner feeling shut out. It leads to you feeling misunderstood. It leads to distance between the two of you. It might even lead to conflict if your anxious partner's like, please tell me, which happens a lot, right? I've got quite a few clients where they come to me and they're like, Dave, last night my partner, we were talking and then I wasn't sure what to say because I hadn't quite thought through all my thoughts about the thing I wanted to say. And then she badgered me for an hour and a half to tell her. And I told her, and then she screamed and shouted at me and cried and ran around the room or stormed out the room or whatever. So it happens, right? What also is important to know inside of relationships when dating, when we're avoiding, we have this kind of emotional delay. It's this inability to process our emotions quickly, right? So what happens is we will feel something and to some degree we overthink it, right? Or we're not so connected to our body and the sensations and knowing what's really happening there. So we take a day, hours, days to really think about it and process it, right? So this is why it's really bad if you're an anxious person and you're with an avoidant person and you're in a conflict and they go quiet and you say, oh, what's going on? They're like, I'm not sure. I need to have a think about this. And you push them to answer you now because your anxiety is driving you, anxious person, because you need certainty. You want to know. You want to know what's happening now in case they're thinking about leaving you and you can do something about it, right? You want to know. But what you actually create is you create a stress for him, right? You create a lot of fear for him. And then you've built up all this emotion and fear and worry. And when he says the thing, often what I've seen personally with my clients is that then he says the thing, it triggers more emotion in you. You have an outburst. He feels shame because he shouldn't have said anything. He feels he should have stood his boundary, but he didn't. Now he feels ashamed that he didn't stood by his boundary. And now he feels like the relationship's blown up and now he wants to run away from you, right? That's what happens. The deeper wound, this is important. Underneath this, right, is this growing up piece. One or two things happen. Often there's a mother who is, or a parent, could be mother or father, who's emotionally distant. There's usually always one parent who is emotionally distant, right? That they see through this parent that emotions and feelings are weakness, whether there's something they say or when they express themselves, right? Or they also have a parent who is unattuned emotionally, meaning they're not really attuned to the children's emotions. I see this most commonly with the fathers, but from time to time it just happens with a mother that's this person, right, who's, usually avoidant of what we're saying, right? They are and then there's a flip side, right? And it could be a parent, mother or father. Usually this is the mother, I find, where they are overly emotional. And the man feels responsible for her feelings and moods, feeling that they have to manage their mother's or father's emotions and feelings, right? And they don't do it very well, so they feel inadequate around that. So they don't want to, they're scared of emotions because they've had big expressions and it's overwhelming for them. So what do we do? The first thing we have to do, what do you do? How do you solve this? The first thing you have to do, you have to separate what you want to say from your imagined response of your partner. You have to separate them, not the same thing. You want to say this thing, great. You're responsible for saying the thing. You're not responsible for their reaction, right? Because if you always collapsing like, I feel something and she's going to react badly, you're never going to really say very much, right? You're just going to avoid it all the time. So it's like naming it, what you're feeling, what's going on, and you can take a pen and pad and write it down. This can be really useful because thinking sometimes just bounces around the head. And you then stop trying to predict the future. Stop using a prediction as a way to avoid, right? One of the things to say is to start to actually communicate like, I'm feeling something. This is number 2. I'm feeling something I'd like to share, but I'm not sure how to say it well. And I'm concerned. I'm concerned that you might take this badly or in the wrong way, right? Because then there's a level of kind of self-awareness and empathy in there. And there's a certain level of openness and vulnerability, right? And then you can talk about the thing. Right, because you've acknowledged that maybe you're being a bit clumsy in your words, right? And you can also add in there like, hey, I want to say all of this, and I would like you to, if you can just respond, wait for me to finish before you want to respond or ask me any questions. That's another important thing, because there's nothing worse. This is for you anxious people. There's nothing worse than when you start talking about how you feel and you're a bit nervous, and the person you're talking to keeps jumping in and asking you questions to clarify things, or they're disagreeing with things, and it just throws you off, and you're like, well, I don't want to talk. You always want me to open up, but when I do, you don't actually let me speak. Yeah? Really simple thing. Another point here to solve this is to learn to be in your body and not just thinking about your feelings. Feel your feelings, not thinking them. Too often what we do is we just think about our feelings. We don't actually feel them, right? And then they become overwhelming stories in our minds, and we just feed each other. Right. So it's taking the time to feel. That can be breathing. And I'm like, okay, I'm feeling anxious about a relationship. Take 5 minutes to breathe with it. Just take that 5 minutes. Even if you're worried, if I do this, it's going to just be here forever. It's not. What makes it be there forever is when you have a feeling and then you start thinking about it and you ruminate on stories that create more anxiety. Feelings have a half-life, a shelf life of seconds. Yeah. They don't last that long. It's the story we keep thinking about and recreating that actually makes them last way, way longer. Next way to do this much better is this. One of the things we often have as avoidant men is this defensiveness. We get defensive about stuff, right? And actually, the defensiveness is our responsibility. Is the way we want to try to protect ourselves. So it's like inviting yourself to, when something's said to you and you're being asked to share, instead of being defensive and trying to push it away or disagree, is actually inviting in a pause. Slowing down and pausing more will do so much for your ability to relate. And that sounds so simple, but it really makes such a difference. If before you have to respond to anyone, you take 5 seconds to just pause before you say anything. Because the first reaction that comes is very rarely our true reaction. It's often our kind of habitual reaction to things, or wounded reaction to things, right? So to calm the defensiveness. Another thing I've got here is start to trust in your emotional capacity. What we unconsciously do as avoidant men is we believe our emotional capacity is really small, which means we can't deal with the reaction that comes from our partners. So we make up a story, we can't deal with it, so we don't speak. But if you start to trust in your emotional reaction to receive their response and start to practice being able to have bigger emotional responses and receive them, practice I do inside my programs and one-to-one clients, right? Because that's what we have to do, is grow our emotional capacity to receive, right? As you stretch, you have more confidence in having difficult conversations and speaking up. It happens over time. You just grow more confident in speaking up. And then you're like, actually, even if she does respond negatively, it's okay, right? I can deal with it. It's not going to kill me. It's not the end of the world, right? And then the last point I'll say here is around separating someone's reaction from meaning about you. Because often what we collapse is, if she reacts badly, that means I'm a bad person. I'm a bad partner. There's something wrong with me. I shouldn't have spoken up. No. The reaction is her responsibility. Your responsibility was to be there, share how you feel, stay in the conversation, stay present. If someone overreacts to what you said, then it's not necessarily your responsibility. And it's like separating that, because that's one of the things that stops us, because we're like, if I say this thing and she reacts badly, then I'm a bad person. It all comes back to this deeper belief we have about not being good enough, right? That underlies so many things. So in closing, what can you do to open up and feel more? I didn't mention this one, but I'm going to say this. One of the things we have to watch out for is the story that we're creating about the reaction, growing our emotional capacity, and learn to get ourselves out of our thoughts, regulate ourselves out of anxiety, fight or flight, fear and worry, back into calm, back into openness, back into compassion for ourselves and others. Because when we get into the ruminating, we go into this anxiety, this fear, this fight or flight. There's not much expansive thinking that can happen there. We get trapped in very narrow thinking loops, right? And it doesn't make for great relationships. And it means that we shut down, we don't express ourselves, we don't open up, and we create distance because we're in kind of survival. And when we're in survival, we want to be alone or we want to be separate. And that's something that we can all work on daily. This is why so many of the practices I work with my clients is about expanding their capacity to hold emotion, their own and others, as well as regulate themselves and come into calm, because that's the difference between you speaking up calmly about what you're feeling and your partner responding calmly. Whereas if you have been ruminating and you've left it for 4 weeks before you've spoken about this thing that's obviously going on, they're feeling frustrated because they feel left out, they feel isolated. And then you say the thing, and part of the reaction is a frustration of weeks or months or years of you not leaning in, you not communicating, that comes at you. So if you learn to have these conversations earlier, the response is way less on average, right? You're welcome for this. I know you're saying thank you. A joke. If you really want to learn this and be helped through these sorts of processes to expand your emotional capacity, learn the tools of communication, while also learning how to be more grounded and present, because that's one of the really important parts. And also how to kind of weather the dance of the masculine and feminine in relationship, because that's something we don't learn because we're full of so much fear. I have a program for you. It's called Relate. It's really about cultivating and learning the vital skills for relational success, for being the sort of man you want to be in a relationship, being that kind of passionate, present, masculine man in a relationship who can really lead a relationship well. And if that's interesting to you, which it should be if you're listening to this podcast, then head over into the show notes where there's a wait list where you can sign up, and you'll be the first people, because there's a ton of people on there ready to find out about the program, and the spots are limited. So I'm just going to go to the wait list first and offer the spots on the wait list. And if they take all the spots, then they take all the spots, right? And then I don't need to publicize it publicly for quite a few months, because this is something I'm going to be running for some time now, right? And I don't want you to miss out. I don't want you to keep having shitty relationships just because you're too proud to fill in a form with a few questions on it. Tell me what you thought of the podcast episode. Any questions? Maybe you're an avoidant man and you're not sure about some things I said. Maybe you're an anxious woman and you are in the grips and you don't know how to deal with your partner or how to help them or show them to do the work. Pop your questions down below and I'll say ciao.